All right, thanks y'all for coming out to the SOS Alliance Barton Springs University. It's the second year y'all have done this.
Yes.
The Barton Springs Fest, which included a diving competition this morning. Who all was there for the diving competition? It was great. If you missed it, put it on your calendar for next year. It was a lot of fun. A bunch of people. We'll have the list of winners on the website later, right? Anyway, I'm really honored. My name is Bridget Shea. I was honored to be one of the leaders of the Save Our Springs initiative in 1992. August 8th was the 21st anniversary, so SOS is fully legal, 21 years old. And I was really honored to work with Bill Bunch, who's our next speaker. Bill is a remarkable guy, both for his courageous leadership, because 21 years of fighting this fight would wear down even the strongest person, and Bill is still at it and still doing a terrific job. So I'm really, I think we all owe a debt. Our community owes him a debt of gratitude and then some. In addition to being the executive director, he serves as the lead attorney for the SOS Alliance. He helped co-found the organization in 1992, along with myself and other leaders from the Austin Sierra Club, Clean Water Action, and numerous other community environmental organizations. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental biology from the University of Colorado and a law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. And this session will focus on the greatest threats to the quality and quantity of Barton Springs flows and how each of us can be part of the solution. So let's give a big hand to Bill Bunch.
Thank you, Bridget. I guess I'll use the mic. We'll see how it goes here. I put together an outline, and I'm going to keep this short because we're a little bit behind schedule and we want to catch up and we don't want to wear folks out. But I'm going to shoot through this outline and hit the high points so that we can all jump in the springs real quick and get back here for Gary Pettis' talk starting at about 1 o'clock. Bridget was very nice in giving me some credit there, but the most fundamental thing that we are reminded of every day is the idea that it really takes a community to save a community springs. Barton Springs will live and thrive and flow for future generations only to the extent that our whole community recognizes how important it is to us and how the things that we need to do to pass it on to the next generation. So we'll start with the threats. They're real basic: pollution, pavement, overpumping. And then we have the factor of changing climate on top of those three. So with pollution, we don't have pipes dumping sewage or toxic industrial waste into our watershed. We're blessed that we don't have that. The pollution that we have is the nasty stuff that washes off of our streets and lawns and rooftops and parking lots every time it rains. And these are some basic types: card droppings, petroleum hydrocarbons, copper and other heavy metals from our brake linings that wear off that are toxic in the aquatic environment. Then we have our lawn and landscape chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides that are also washing off our landscape every time it rains. And then we have pathogens, bacteria and viruses, also washing off the landscape every time it rains. They go into our creeks and streams, our rivers, lakes, into the aquifer. They come out at the springs. So if we have a big rain, don't swim in the springs for a few days. Let it settle down and clear up, and then it's safe to go swim. And it's the same is true for other natural bodies of water. A good test is if it's clear. It's probably safe. And that's one upside of the drought that we've had, is that the water is so clear because the aquifer is settled. It's extremely clean and safe for swimming. Now, the pollutants, because we've had urbanization and development upstream, we have toxins in the water. Most of these are hydrophobic. They attach to sediment particles and they settle on the bottom, where they are harmful to some of the more vulnerable and sensitive aquatic life forms. The little water bugs, amphipods, freshwater crustaceans that are sort of the base of the food chain. The critters that the salamanders eat, the fish eat. And we have seen some of those sediments be at levels that are toxic to these creatures. So we see the warning signs. We have more nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients from fertilizers, from wastewater irrigation facilities that allow some wastewater to get into the system, from some leaking sewer lines. All of these tend to add a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus that allows for more algae growth to happen, and sometimes we get nasty algae blooms. So those are the basic categories of pollution and the sources that we have. They're listed here. Pavement delivers those pollutants into the system very efficiently, and that's why we have this spike in pollution after a rainstorm, and then it clears up once things settle down until the next storm. But the other thing that pavement does is it blocks the rainfall from entering the ground and nourishing the plants and being captured and soaked up like a sponge in the soils and going into the groundwater. Instead, that rainfall hits that pavement, rooftops, parking lots, etc. It rushes off very fast instead of soaking in and slowly percolating towards our streams. So we get much higher peak flows that causes massive erosion in our streams, flooding, sometimes very dangerous flooding like the famous Memorial Day flood where a lot of people drowned right along Lamar Boulevard there near Whole Foods in that stretch. And so that's what happens when it rains with pavement. On the other hand, because that water didn't soak into the ground, when it doesn't rain, everything dries up. That water didn't go into the ground, into storage, and where it could slowly feed the streams during drought times. So then our streams dry up completely. So we have, instead of a sort of gentle curve of how the water flows, we have these spikes, boom and bust. And a lot of times our urban streams, Shoal Creek is a perfect example, where it's bone dry most of the time. It's not a living stream anymore. We don't want that to happen to our hill country streams. So that's pavement, pollution pavement. Overpumping. With more growth, there's more pressure to pump the aquifer. There's about 50,000 people depending on the Barton Springs piece of the Edwards for their drinking water, mostly in far southern Travis, northern Hayes counties, and the Buda and Kyle area. Thankfully, we have the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District that has permitted the pumping and is limiting it and is doing quite a good job of making sure that there's not excessive pumping. But we still have a problem. There's too many permits out there, despite their best efforts. And if we have a really serious drought, the spring flows could fall precipitously and theoretically even stop flowing, but perhaps just be so low that it's not safe for swimming. So overpumping. What does climate change do to the picture? Well, the short version and the simple version is what we're seeing is we're getting a little bit hotter and a little bit drier. But if you put those two together, they add up to dramatic reduction in recharge to the aquifer and runoff to our rivers and streams and lakes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If it's a little bit hotter, we have a lot more evaporation. More of the water that rain that does fall evaporates. The other thing that happens is our plants don't go dormant as much as they would before when we had colder winters. And so we're seeing plants growing straight through the winter, or maybe only going dormant for a few weeks. And those plants need water, and they're taking that water up at a higher rate than they used to. So what that means is then when we do get the rain, the soils are already dried out and they soak up much more water. The plants take it. more evaporates, and so much less recharges the aquifer or runs off. And that is a very serious issue for water resources across the Southwest in the years ahead. We don't know how bad the changing climate is going to happen. It could be slow, it could be fast. Nobody has a perfect crystal ball. But we're already seeing those effects right now, where this year we're only an inch or two behind in our normal rainfall patterns. But we're getting almost no flow into the Highland Lakes, and that's why Lake Travis is still at roughly 2/3 empty, 1/3 full. So that adds to it. Then we have the, flipping over just real quick, the socioeconomic factors. Legislature here in Texas, pro-development, has sort of a mindset that we don't want cities to control development. They say they support local control, but they really mean they support controlling the locals. So they've taken away a lot of our land use powers, and those are limited now. So what we have to turn to more is not regulating, although we do the best we can with that, science-based regulation, and then I'm sort of feeding over into the solutions here, and that includes the SOS ordinance, limiting that impervious cover footprint, so we're preserving as much of the natural water functions of rainfall, feeding the landscape, going and soaking into the ground. But beyond those regulations, since we're limited in what we can do, we have to be very careful where we spend our money to support development, where we build our roads, where we extend our water and sewer. So that's where we invest our public dollars. So we need to do the best we can convincing our local officials to spend money building roads and water and sewer infrastructure to the east and downstream of the recharge zone, to support development in our preferred growth areas, sort of along I-35 and to the east, and to minimize those investments that further growth, further pollution, and encourage more pumping in the aquifer zone to the southwest, southwest Travis and northern Hays County. So regulate, invest, preserve. We've been, as a community, buying quite a bit of watershed protection lands to set it aside permanently, so we don't have this fight over development where we can avoid it. And right on the fence over here, there's quite a good map that shows protected lands in Travis and northern Hays counties in the late 80s, and then lands protected today. And some of that's in the Barton Springs watershed, but also Lake Austin and Bull Creek North. We've protected a lot of land for watersheds, for parks, and for endangered species habitats. And we need to keep doing more of that. So when you see a bond proposition on the ballot to buy more protection lands, support that, please. Permanent protection. And then just education. You're here, you're learning more, you're empowered with participating in the public process. And voting, supporting candidates that support protecting resources, managing and directing our growth to preferred areas, and leaving this incredible watershed and water resource free-flowing and clean and clear for future generations. So a couple of other things you can do, and I just touched on it. You know, educate yourself. Our website, the city has some excellent websites with a range of resources about the aquifer, how it works, the city's watershed protection efforts. The Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District also has some excellent materials on their website. That's another good source of information. Participate. You're here, you're doing it. Vote. If you're not on our email news list, please sign up for that. A lot of times we'll ask you to send an email to an elected official when an important decision's up, an issue about building a road or expanding a road or not building one, regulating development. Have your voice heard by the decision makers, local, state, and federal, when those important decision points come up. And then vote and volunteer. Vote at the ballot box, but just showing up once every couple of years is not enough. In between, you can be vocal. You can write letters to the editor. You can call your elected officials and talk to them. You can attend critical city council meetings, county commissioner meetings, and be there in person and exercise your right of citizenship in how we grow and develop our community. And then vote in the marketplace. You can support the businesses that are our sponsors. They're shown on the t-shirt. And other, especially locally owned businesses that generally are very supportive and have a natural affinity for preserving Barton Springs. And then conversely, not spending your money with the companies that are locating on the watershed when they shouldn't, and they have other places to locate, or are trying to force development projects through that might impact the watershed. So that's a short list of things you can do. There's certainly others, but I'm not just pushing you to get involved with Save Our Springs Alliance. There's a number of great groups here, groups that we partner with that you can get involved with. The Austin Sierra Club has a monthly meeting, and usually it's a very informative speaker at Schultz's Garden. Is that second Tuesday, first Tuesday? Help me out here. I'm pretty sure it's the second Tuesday. That's on their website too. Clean Water Action, Environment Texas, Texas Campaign for the Environment, all of those groups are active. And Preservation Austin, which has a table here, they are dedicated to preserving our history and our cultural history. And we've just now started working more with them to recognize that this is not just a natural resource, but this is a historic and cultural resource for the city. Austin really located here in significant part because the springs were here. And literally we're here today because the springs are here. And you can say the same thing about San Marcos at San Marcos, New Braunfels at Comal Springs, San Antonio at San Pedro Springs. So these great springs are really the life support system for this whole region. And they are under threat, pollution and overpumping primarily, and they need folks to recognize that we can't just build everywhere and build anything at any time. We have to manage our growth and be careful about how we do it. So thank you very much. And I'll take a few questions. I think that was short and sweet, wasn't it? What was that? Yeah, okay. I did all right. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, speaking of building and infrastructure, what is the organization's position on MOPAC's South project and planned expansion in MOPAC?
Okay, the question was about a proposed expansion of South MOPAC. We're just now starting to look at that. It just sort of surfaced. Generally, our initial approach is that we're against it because it would only encourage even more development over the aquifer. And the expansion is really being driven by a desire to make MOPAC essentially an I-35 West. Right now, MOPAC sort of dead ends at the south end. It's like almost a cul-de-sac, not entirely, but partially. And so that keeps MOPAC operating as a local commuter highway. But the planned expansion and then the connection of the south end over to I-35 is really being driven by a perspective that we want an integrated loop all the way around the city and to make MOPAC part of an interregional or even the interstate highway system. And we think that's bad for neighborhoods along MOPAC, it's bad for the aquifer, and it will only increase congestion, and that's sort of counterintuitive. But quite often we see roads are expanded, they fill up very quickly, and they don't really solve a traffic problem They encourage more growth further out, more commuting, more driving, and it's not really, it's like chasing your tail. It doesn't solve a traffic problem, it makes it worse. And we think this is probably one of those, but we're still looking at it. Yes? Roger Baker, he's one of the SOS Alliance board members, and he's one of our resident transportation experts. He was, for those who didn't hear, CAMPO, Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, is the entity that plans our transportation for this whole region. And they meet monthly. You can go down and speak and have your voice heard and try to weigh in and try to steer those very limited transportation dollars into projects that give people alternatives and that support development in areas where we want that development to go rather than over the aquifer. Okay, another question?
Talk about catastrophic spills with those roads too.
Yeah, that's a good point. In addition to sort of the constant pollution runoff every rainfall, there is threats of catastrophic spills. Those are actually fairly common with major truck traffic. And right now we have very limited truck traffic on Mopac, and we'd like to keep it that way. We have a risk of catastrophic spills also if we have a big fire at, say, the Walmart or Costco or one of those places where the tendency of fire departments is go and spray it down. But if something's burning and there's a lot of chemicals in there, you're flushing that pollution into the aquifer. And I know that's an issue they've been trying to figure out, and I'm not sure they've got a good handle on it. Well, Steve asked about what about the legislature, and there was one topic that I wanted to touch on that I didn't, and that's sort of what we can each do to conserve water, and it ties to the legislature. Really, our water future has to be based on efficiency, becoming a lot more efficient with our water use. And we can do that, and in fact we've been doing it for quite some time. Our water use is hardly any larger than it was 20 years ago. And we've added 300,000 people to the Austin Water Utility service area. And that's a very consistent pattern. Los Angeles is using about the same amount of water they used 30 years ago. They're serving 1 million more people. San Antonio, same water use as 25 years ago, and they've grown hugely. San Antonio is an actual model for water efficiency. With the changing climate, we simply don't have the water. And so it's very dangerous to think that we can solve our water problem by extending pipelines to pipe it in or building more reservoirs in different places. Because that water is limited as well. And it's incredibly expensive and environmentally damaging to build reservoirs and long-distance pipelines. And it encourages us to think that we have the water to waste. On the other hand, efficiency is way, way cheaper, a fraction of the cost. And when you build a water efficient economy like we've started to do, and it's the community's already embracing this, we're changing how we landscape. You see more and more native landscapes, people letting their old water intensive St. Augustine and other plants die and replace them with more water efficiency. But when you take that approach, you don't have to expand your treatment plants and you don't have to expand your sewer plants. And those are enormous costs. And so we need a water future that continues to push us to be efficient, to reuse our water where we can for non-potable uses, rather than to think that we can send a pipeline to East Texas where they have more water and pump it in, or build another dam somewhere. And the legislature put a bond item, actually a constitutional amendment that we all get to vote on in November, to create a $2 billion loan fund to fund water projects. And we haven't taken an official position as SOS, but we're very concerned that that $2 billion will do more harm than good. if it's funneled into these kinds of very expensive projects that feed wasteful water use. And the vast majority of the projects that money would fund are for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is using, on a per capita basis, about a third to 30 to 40% more water per person than we are here or San Antonio. It's just absurd how much water they're wasting. And then it's absurd to sort of feed that habit with these very expensive projects when they could do like Austin and San Antonio, Los Angeles and El Paso are doing to build a water efficient economy. So again, we haven't taken an official position on that yet. We're going to look at it a little closer, but I'm personally concerned about if that money is approved that it'll be abused and won't actually help us, but could hurt us. One last question. We're going to cut it off after that.
Thank
Roy.
you, Bill.
Yes.
Could you say something about pushing for, in subdivisions existing and to be approved, a stronger capture of rainwater, strong runoff through retention swales, better package treatment plants, not only capturing gray water but treating it to one or two more stages so that we can really better, more efficiently use all of the water that we use.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the Roy Mann, who's on the Hill Country Alliance Advisory Board and is a landscape architect here, he was, I don't know if y'all heard, but he was talking about the benefits that are there for rainfall catchment, more rainwater harvesting, more subdivision design with rain gardens, so you're capturing water and infiltrating it rather than treating it as a waste and sending it away. And then more smaller packaged wastewater plants where you reuse it locally rather than send it all the way across town to be, just discharged into the river. All of those are important. One really important thing that just happened that's gotten almost no attention is the city just approved new plumbing ordinance that makes it much easier to do gray water systems, small scale gray water systems, so that you can divert water out of your sinks and bathtubs straight into your yard and your gardens with not too much hassle. The permitting is pretty easy. The engineering can be easy or it can be hard. If you have a slab foundation, quite often it's more difficult or a little more challenging. But that's a huge resource of reusing it right on your own property rather than sending it off to the sewer plant. And what's great about gray water is you're getting some every day. And especially, hot August, September, when our trees really need it, especially, you've got the water there without increasing your own water use to provide that. So we're gonna be focusing on that piece of it in the months ahead to really try to have people embrace gray water as a viable option for their landscaping at home. So thank you for that question.
And let's hear it for Bill Bunch.
Very good.